Good luck. Okay, you can do. So, hi everybody. We are GDG Milano. How many people already knew us? What? Other news? How many are here for the first time? Here, I mean, a GDG event. That's kind of good. And so we are a community involved with the Google technologies. And our motto is follow, learn, and share, because we keep ourselves updated with the technologies. We learn them, and we share a lot about what we know. We are a lot of GDG groups here in the world, and in Italy we are a lot too, about 30. And what do? We organize code labs, we organize talks, and we organize in general community events like hackathons or hashcode competition, coding competition, and stuff like that. And you can find us on Meetup, where we publish the events we organize, on Telegram, which is our main channel of communication. We have a Telegram group where we talk about the events and other things about this. And we have a website too. You can find it there. And we want you, we are always looking for people who will help us to contribute, talking or organizing stuff. Just the least you could do, that would be great for us. And the next event is tomorrow. Yeah, this is a short notice, and we're organizing a hub for participating to the Google coding competition called Hashcode. Some of you might know it. And you can find the events on Meetup, and you can subscribe to it, or ask information on the Telegram group. And for tonight, I present you Will, which works at the Flutter team. He is the lead engineer for the material design, and he has a lot of experience working on the material design. And tonight he's going to talk about us for this.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Oh, careful. Your laptop.
Thanks.
That's the second one I get this ready. It's so wonderful to see so many people here. Just so I know in the room, who here has tried Flutter before? Oh, great. That's almost everybody. Is anybody using it full time, like on their day job? Oh, great. That's awesome. All right. There we go. All right, so like you said, I'm Will Larche. I'm the Flutter Engineering Lead for Material Design. The Material Design team is the design umbrella organization for all of Google. So it's the reason why Google Apps all kind of look and behave the same way. We create the guidelines and frameworks that allow that design to be executed in a standard way. We have engineering teams that create frameworks for iOS, Android, web, Polymer. If you've heard of Polymer, it's a web framework. And I founded the Flutter team a couple years ago. Flutter obviously started a couple years before that, and we were so impressed with what they did that we really wanted to partner closely with them. So we sit with them whenever we can. We write code in the same code bases. We obviously go to the same developer relations events together. And we help them stay ahead on all things design. So here's what I'm going to go over tonight. I'm going to give you a little bit of rundown of Flutter Interact and maybe a couple things you might have missed. I'm going to give a really brief intro to the Google Fonts for Flutter package that we just released. And then I'll dive into a couple things from our new gallery. Can everyone hear me okay? The mic good? Yeah, great. We are using it to showcase some of our newish best practices on adaptive layout, also known as responsive design, accessibility, and internationalization. First, also, I want to say thank you to GDG Milano for having me here. It's really wonderful to be here. It's also really great to see how excited some of you are about Flutter. It's really, really amazing to be working on a product that's doing well for once. That part's great. I come from startups. It's tough, you know? It's nice to be at Google. Anyway, so about Flutter. We think of Flutter as having 3 different ways that it can be used. One, you can obviously start a completely new app, brand new code base, and begin building from there. Sometimes also people use Flutter to add a platform that they didn't have. So maybe you have an Android app, but you want to do iOS. Now people are looking at Flutter as a way to build that iOS app, knowing that if they're satisfied with it, they could then decide to get rid of the Android code base they have and then just use the one. Or now even people are using it to add web where they didn't have it before. And of course, Flutter can be added into an app that already exists that's written in the native frameworks of the mobile platforms. Some exciting statistics. It's been a really good year for Flutter. Since we launched the stable 1.0 last year, this is the growth we've seen. We've got over 1 billion users of Flutter apps, which I believe is a significant portion of Earth. There are over 1 million developers using Flutter now. It's the #1 fastest growing skill on LinkedIn. I don't know if LinkedIn is here in Italy. Is it? Okay, yeah. And of course, on GitHub, it's in the top 10. And what's really exciting is it just now has more stars than Linux and React Native, which is unbelievable. And Stack Overflow rated it the top 3 most loved framework globally, and the year before it wasn't even on the list. So thank you for that if you voted. 2 months ago, GitHub published their State of the Octoverse report. I don't know if you've heard of this. They're the largest site for open source everything. So they have like really unique insights into the open source community and open source health and trends. And we are in their report, and Flutter was the 2nd fastest growing open source project that's on GitHub, with nearly 3 times the growth that we had the year before. And the Dart language, the language that powers Flutter, is the single fastest growing language that they measure. It is growing faster than Rust or TypeScript. And that's amazing, because most of the time when you tell people about Flutter, they say, oh, Dart, because they haven't tried it yet. But then most people, when they try it, seem to like it. In fact, we've run some user research. It's really amazing to be working on the Flutter framework and then have the Dart team be somebody that we partner with, that we can talk to when we need things. I mean, they make everything from the compilers to deciding what features go into the language at all. I asked them for extension methods, and then they just put it in. You're welcome. But it's we did some user research where we put people building their first Flutter app, something that they'd never done before, and then asked them afterwards, what did you think of the language? What did you think of Dart? And one person once actually even said, I didn't realize I was working in a language I had never written in before, because it's so boring. It's so expected in many ways. It is not full of big flashy features. It doesn't try to do things in ways that are very avant-garde. It tries to be dependable. I think that's what you want from a language. But of course, what makes Flutter special is our global community. Flutter is kind of taking off in really, really exciting corners of the world. It's become really big in China and India and in Nigeria. And I have a little video, if it will work. I swear I had sound earlier. Well, this is a video. Oh my God, the music! It's so great. We might have gone. Oh, Macedonia. Well, you can look at it online later. It's all the people doing Flutter and all the different places and all the different things they're doing with it. One of the things that's really cool about Flutter is I had this hypothesis last year, if you saw my talk at Mobile World Congress, which, by the way, that's why I'm in Europe right now. I'm supposed to be at Mobile World Congress next week. Instead, I'll just be in Barcelona. But it's good to be back in Europe. I was in England on Monday, and it was very different. Last year at Mobile World Congress, I spoke about this hypothesis I had that Flutter could democratize mobile apps for people, that the web is easy to tinker in. People have been tinkering with the web since it came out because you just kind of like type something and you mark it up, and then if you can get it hosted somewhere, then you have a website. But that never really happened for mobile because the barrier to entry for getting an iPhone app or an Android app is very big. It's a little difficult to understand what's going on, much less to distribute it. I mean, I don't know if you've tried to distribute an iPhone app, but it's pretty difficult because of the security stuff that's involved in terminology. Flutter, however, is supposed to be easy for people to begin to grasp. Obviously, you still need to become an expert in it if you want to get to all the most advanced features of it. But for the very beginning, we wanted people to be turned on by it, not turned off. And we are seeing that people who have never made mobile apps before are beginning to make mobile apps. People that aren't at companies, but just maybe one developer with an idea or two friends that have an idea are finally building that app idea that they always had that they weren't able to do before. So that's a very exciting development that's happened. Anyway, so Flutter Interact was the event that we had in December in Brooklyn. I suggested Brooklyn because I live there, and it was very convenient for me. I told them that it was like, oh, it's such a design hotspot, which is true, but you know, it was more about the commute. So the focus of this event for us was beauty and design and executing beautiful design through Flutter. We've spoken a lot before about the basics, and we've gotten a lot of people excited, but what we really wanted to see is how far can we take this in just in pure design and in directly into the hands of design agencies and people who build really, really beautiful apps. Can we get them excited about Flutter? And so that's what we worked on. We also kind of spoke about this idea that we have at Google called ambient computing. Ambient computing tries to get you to stop thinking about this question, which is where do you want to run your app? Which means, do you want it to be on iPhones or Android phones or the web or televisions or watches or something else, a countertop device, which is what you have to do right now. If that's kind of the first question you have to solve when you have an idea is, where does it run? Is it a desktop app? You know, in a multi-platform, multi-device world like we're building right now, that's really intimidating to think like, I have to remake this every time, think about how it is every time, build it every time, when what I really just want to focus on is the product. What do I want to build? And then build that and then distribute it to all the places that make sense for your business. Make that a business decision instead of a technology decision. Don't say, well, we only have iOS engineers, so we'll do an iOS app first, you know? You can just say, we only have engineers, so we'll build an app first, instead of, I don't know what, writing a book. But we want you to stop fixating on the target platform and really just focus on the product. That's the real reason why we're doing this. And users want to experience your products and services and brands everywhere that makes sense for them. And this is what ambient computing means. It means that your app can have an experience that's made for countertop, that's made for watches, all these different things. And it's even best if they share state and they understand who the person is. There are lots of really cool things that can happen. I showed something at I/O last year of idea of an app that it has different contexts depending on whether or not you're close to it, so you can read it when it's further away. Now that we're thinking about the same code base being used for, we use Flutter for the Google Home Hub, which is our countertop device. You know, if we think about the same code base for something being written for this, as well as the mobile app, and then eventually as well as the website, and all that being one place with the same logic, that is kind of something that people have wanted forever and haven't been able to do. So it's really exciting that Flutter actually makes this come true in a way that's satisfying. I don't know if everybody knew that we actually use Flutter for the countertop device. It's kind of proof to me that Flutter is a technology that you can use on the bleeding edge of anything, because this is a rather new paradigm. So focusing on design execution on Flutter, we made a big investment in beautiful design execution and adaptive experiences with Flutter, and the world kind of noticed recently. This happened. This may be US-centric, but this magazine chose Flutter and Dart to be one of the 14 most important design ideas of the decade, which is unbelievable because they put us in a list with the iPad, the Tesla, and social media. And then they put Flutter there, which is crazy. I don't even know if that's right. Maybe they shouldn't have put us on that list, but still, it's the sentiment I get. And the reason why we really appreciate it is because the person that chose to put us on this list, the person that chose Flutter, was John Maeda, who is a god in design. He is a very, very important designer in the US. And he does not code. He is not an engineer. He chose to put Flutter on this list merely because of its potential and use for executing beautiful design. So material design, being the official design system of Google, is really betting hard on Flutter. We have our own team of Flutter engineers that I run. There are 4 of us in New York and 4 of us in Munich. And we make sure the newest designs that our designers come up with get to Flutter. And sometimes that happens even before they've been published in the guidelines on our website. And we work closely with them on all sorts of things, including suggestions we have for improving the developer experience around things like theming. I was just talking about that earlier. I don't know if you've tried theming in Flutter, but you probably noticed that that was something that might not have met your expectations, even though it's perfectly usable. It wasn't as easy as other things. We're the ones that work with the Flutter team to say, hey, this is important because it's part of design execution. And so we're working with them on like the next version of that. So keep an eye out. That'll be coming later this year. And the reason why specifically my organization is excited about Flutter is because it begins to deal with this problem that exists right now in product and engineering, which is that when design is ready for handoff, development can begin. But development takes much longer than design, doesn't it? I mean, designers can move really, really fast and then get frustrated with engineers. They're like, why is it taking so long to build? Because it does. It always has, and it's complicated, and people don't understand why just putting some pixels on the screen is so hard, but it is. And over time, that can really turn into a productivity problem. I mean, this is a very optimistic way of looking at this, maybe getting out of sync. Instead, it probably just ends up being a mess with people getting mad at other people. And then, oh, well, you weren't ready, so I started this other project, but I can't get back to you now. I'm in the middle of that. You know, I deal with that all the time. Our goal with Flutter is to make it so that developers can work as fast as designers, so that you can actually stay in sync. If we could make development as fast as design, then we'll really feel like we have changed the way people make apps. And with some of the new tools and integrations that we're working on, we're starting to blur even when one begins and the other ends. Not necessarily who does what, but what the process is like for that handoff. At Interact, we talked about some new plugins that are out there for Adobe XD and Supernova. They allow designers to export code to the engineers and for the engineers to influence design. And so we don't imagine that designers are going to build the apps and then ship those apps anymore. But what we do imagine is that designers will be able to build living prototypes of screens that they can then vet on a real device and really interact with before they say this design is ready for engineering to execute. Or for design, when they've made something very custom, to give code to the engineers that essentially helps them with some of the annoying questions, like what color is that? What font is that? What is the corner radius? What is the shadow radius? Stuff like that. So this code handoff thing, we're really excited about how it can improve the relationship between the designer and the developer. And speaking of plugins, my team released a big plugin, really proud of this one, which is Google Fonts for Flutter. Who here has heard of Google Fonts? Yeah? Okay, great. Yeah, it's very big in the web. It's one of Google's oldest front-end investments. It's from 2010. It's all open source, and it gives anybody the ability to have like really exciting typography inside their product. And you can use these in any way. The licenses are very, very malleable and permissive. And we share a lot of fonts every day. So across the web, since 2010, we've had 34 trillion fonts served by us. And so that's a font every 2 seconds. And what my VP likes to say is that in the time it takes you to say Google fonts for Flutter, that was another million fonts, which is amazing. And so at Interact, we released the official Google Fonts package for Flutter, which lets you get these custom fonts right into your app. And I don't know if anybody here has tried to have custom fonts in their Flutter app the original way, but it's really easy to mess that up because you have to type out paths, you have to drag in files, and those things don't sound complicated, but it's incredibly easy to mess up typing a path. The reason why we made this package is because I was doing an example app and couldn't figure out why I couldn't see the font. And it's because I was like, does it start with a slash? Does it not start with a slash? Does it have to be in a fonts directory? I couldn't remember. And then the sample code that had there, like, I think was wrong or something. I was like, there's got to be a better way. And so we thought, even if we just make it so that people can type that thing better and maybe make fewer mistakes, that'd be an improvement. But what we got was instead something much bigger. So after you imported this package, you get autocomplete so you can get suggestions for fonts names as classes, as functions from the Google Fonts package, and it will download them and put them right into your app for you. So you don't have to worry about any of that weird typing of paths or even dealing with the file at all, because Google Fonts will download that file for you as it's needed when you run it, which is a lot like what you expect on the web. You know, when a web page loads, it often goes to Google Fonts and asks for the font that it needs and then puts it up. And you know, as you can see from that with Hot Reload, it begins to be a little bit more of a fun experience where those of you that are working without designers, which is a large portion of people who work with Flutter, can begin to experiment with your design this way and hopefully play with typography. Bold typography is really big right now. It's a huge trend in design where giant serif fonts with like big bulbs in them, like it's taking over. It's this hipster font experience that people can't get enough of. And now you can have it too. It's dynamic and it's cached. And so that can let you have different fonts for different parts of your app. Perhaps you're a magazine and all the content is served. It's not something that's shipped with the app. And then somebody has laid out something that needs a font that you'd never thought of before. Well, as long as it's in Google Fonts, at the moment that you want to show it, you can get it and then show it. And of course, if for some reason you're offline, it will work by using the default system font. So nothing breaks. But then thinking even more about other markets, it can be very useful to your business. See, we have a lot of research that shows that the size of your app, as it's listed in the Play Store or on the App Store, makes a big difference to whether or not people are going to download it. The larger the app, the fewer people are going to download it. Because I know for me, I don't think about how large an app is because I have really good cellular and all the Wi-Fi and everything. But most of the world is counting megabyte by megabyte. And when they're making choices as to whether or not they're going to update your app or download your app at all. And so the smaller your app is, the more people will download it. And as you can see, if you're just working in Latin fonts, maybe you just need 2 and it's really small like that. But once you move to supporting Chinese character sets, that grows like a lot, because Chinese has a lot more glyphs in it than the Latin alphabet does. And that's why a lot of apps that show Chinese fonts don't use any, they don't use any font weights. They'll all be the same one. They'll all be just regular. So there's no italic, no bold, no light, or anything like that. Because it's too heavy to include all of that. I know that if I had to make a choice on how heavy my font was, I'd probably say, well, just ship 1 of those. Don't ship 2 of them. So now that you can download that at runtime, yes, you are deferring the cost of downloading those megabytes to a later date, but you are also making sure that only the people who need those fonts will download them. So you are sparing the people who don't need to show Chinese characters from having to download those, 33 megabytes there. So if you haven't tried it out yet, I suggest you go try out Google Fonts. It's on pub.dev right now. You just put it in your pub spec and go. And I'll give you a little preview as to what's coming for version 1.0. We're improving the autocomplete, making it even faster. We are working on the theming experience with it so that Google Fonts and theming just kind of work well together. And we're making it so that you can pre-bundle the font by downloading it at build time instead of having to wait until runtime. So Google Fonts and Flutter and Material are all part of what Google is thinking of as their suite of first-class front-end offerings. These are the things that Google wants you to build your apps out of. These things go well together and partner together in order to create experiences that should be positive for you. And it's just the beginning. Lots more stuff is being invested in by Google in this space on all of these things. We have a lot more features coming in the next year. And of course, we keep adding also backwards compatibility for a lot of things, adding in older device types like desktop. Now we have taken Mac OS and putting it into beta. I believe it's in beta right now. Whereas a lot of people would have assumed that desktop, well, that's out. People only deal with mobile now. And then we have all this data that shows like, no, there's a ton of users on desktop apps. There's a ton of them. You should have a desktop version of your app if it's not too expensive. So an example of an app that's made to run in all of those things is available for you at github.com/flutter/samples. And it's our new Flutter Gallery. Has everyone heard of Flutter/samples? Well, it's a really great repository full of sample code of all sorts of kinds. This one is a project that my team worked on. Like I said, we're focused now on these three areas, these three form factors: mobile, desktop, and web. But unfortunately, the galleries that we had, you can see the one on the left is the original version. I don't know if any of you were using Flutter back in 2017, but that was designed by an engineer, and that's what it looked like. It didn't scale very well because anytime they added a demonstration for another component or something, it just went into that long list, which over time grew very, very long. And so when we released Material 2 a couple years ago, we revamped it to take advantage of theming and be a little more specific to the Flutter brand, because we wanted to show people how to express brand in design. But I had the notion that we needed to really redo this when I saw a demonstration by someone from the Flutter team to a group just like this in New York, where they were showing Flutter for Web, and they opened the gallery and they opened the text field demo, and it looked like this. That's not a good form. I would not want to fill out that form if I was past that form. This is all stretched out. It was made for mobile and was never considered for desktop. It's not a responsive design, even if it didn't break, which is great that there were no like overflows or anything. It's terrible. Even though I just wanted to add support for desktop, when we looked under the hood, we realized that a lot of things had changed and improved since the original version was written in 2017, and that it'd be a really great chance for us to start over and do a full rebuild and show people, from our point of view, open source code for building most of an app. This app obviously doesn't talk to the internet or anything. It's static to demonstrate code, but it's a lot of an app. We worked with this agency called Toaster in London. They're amazing. And they asked us, what should the app look like? They're like, should it look like Google Material? Should it look like all the Google apps that are out there, where it builds from white and it uses the Google colors, like that blue? I said, well, maybe, but we're not just showing Material stuff. We're also showing Cupertino, the iOS design language library that Flutter has. And I was like, well, those look out of place if we put them inside something that's so Google Material looking. And then I thought, even Material itself is supposed to have its own section where you're supposed to really notice the features of Material. Would you be able to notice Material inside of Material? I was having Inception and it was not working. And I really wanted to show off all the UI APIs that we had, not just the ones that we had thought of before. So that meant having some room for things that maybe weren't used in Material or Cupertino. And so I told them to work outside of a design system. And of course, if you've never heard of that term, a design system is what we call material design, where you can put in input of the features you need and data and stuff like that, essentially apply the design system, and out will come a full app. That's obviously like not exactly how it works. We don't have a factory for apps, but it's comprehensive enough to cover the vast majority of critical user journeys and use cases when it comes to design. A design system is supposed to be comprehensive like that. And most people thought you've got the material one and you've got the iOS one, but the iOS one isn't even a design system, it's a design language, which means that it's not comprehensive and it's just some pieces. If you look at Apple's HIG, the Human Interface Guidelines, it's not the idea that you could put in all the features, apply all of these components and come out with an app. Instead, they say these however many things are important to us and we want you to apply just those. So I asked them to work outside of a design system. And so we went from the one on the left, which was the current one, to the one on the right. That's the mobile version. This is the desktop version. And here's what we put in it. We had to keep the existing features that we had, like the material studies, which is our little like applets inside. We had Shrine, which is our shopping one, Rally, the fintech one, Crane for travel. We had the material component demos. We had the Cupertino component demos. And we wanted to add in some new stuff that people were asking us about, like how to use adaptive layout, full use of the accessibility APIs, and having it be fully internationalized and localized. And we also thought they'd be really great if we give you code samples that you could copy right from the app and put directly where you want them to. So I'll show this to you if I can. Come on. Great. Oh, I can't see the little buttons over there. I'll have to drag it. Oh, it's covered by a thing on my screen. Is that the green one? Is that green? Is that it? No? You have to help me. Oh, you can't see it either? Yeah. Oh, great. I know what I'll do. I'll just come back here and I will mirror the built-in display. Okay, great. Now I can see it. Okay. And I had it sleeping. So here's the gallery. Frame rate's usually weird over this sort of thing. So in here we have the desktop versions of things that we had before, like Shrine, and they're totally responsive. So you can see how they change as they need to. We've got all the demos that we had, and I think a couple more. Like here's the sliders one. And if you look at the sample code for this, which you can find by hitting this button, this is the exact code that's being run inside that demo. So this equals that. So that if you see something you like, you can just go and copy it, figure out how it's done. Each one's got a few options for various different things. And the Cupertino, the iOS stuff too. So this is what we got. Now, here's some of the fun stuff. The #1 accessibility feature that people use anywhere in the world is text scaling. You may know somebody that uses it. You may use it yourself. It's something that people use when they actually don't even think of themselves as having vision problems. Text scaling is how you, it's mostly used on mobile phones. Otherwise on web, people just go like Command+. It's how you can see the default text size grow. This is the easiest way you can make your app more accessible, but also the easiest way to break your layout if you're not paying attention. If you turn this up by turning up the text scaling, you'll often see those yellow lines all over the place saying that you've done something wrong. So we did this for you so you can take a look at how we solve some of the problems of doing that. Now you can see that there are compromises that have to happen when that happens, because when you've engaged accessibility features, it's all right for function to take precedent over form. It's okay for things to not look their best in this case. What you're doing is helping people use the features. We also added in locales. So let's see, if I turn on Italian, You can tell me if any of this makes sense. How'd they do? Can you even read that? Oh, well, I can't read that now. There we go. So it's obviously, you know, probably that this is one of the best things that you can do to get more customers for almost free, because you didn't have to really change anything inside your app except make it readable by people in another language. This is something I have to explain to people in the US, because we're very used to thinking of just the US, America first, right? Sorry. We also know that a lot of people are intimidated by other languages because you may not speak any other language. You may only speak your own. That at the very least, you can run things through Google Translate. It will make bizarre mistakes and it won't sound right, but it will probably be much more usable than yours is without doing anything. And as I encourage people back home, you never know who you know that may know a language. And then we also added in full RTL support. Now, some of the languages like Hebrew and Arabic, they go the other way. They go right to left instead of left to right. And that breaks people's apps all over the place, and they become unusable. This is something that you can easily test in here. Come back. All right. And then the last thing that we did that's more difficult for me to show you here is we added in full support for all the semantics APIs that we could use. So the semantics library is the accessibility library in Flutter. It's really easy to use, and I have some slides showing you how. Oh, well, first let's talk about the adaptive layout, and then I'll get to the rest. But now I have to go back and do the thing. I'm sorry. This technology is always such a whatever. All right. Oh, nope, not that one. Okay. So the adaptive layout, how did we accomplish it in ours? We focused on only 2 form factors because we only had 3 months to do it. And all the people, by the way, that were working on this, except for one, had, except for 2, had no Flutter experience. So we were working with engineers who all came from completely different frameworks and disciplines, and they were able to create this app together in 2.5 to 3 months. We focused on mobile and we focused on desktop. And tablet often is very similar to desktop anyway. But of course, in the real world, you may have many more form factors that you need to worry about. We wanted to showcase the flexibility that we had, and we wanted to develop what we can call best practices. It's been difficult for us to pin down best practices sometimes because Flutter is so new. And people like you often ask us, how should we be doing X, Y, and Z? And many times we say, we're not sure, we're watching you. We're trying to see if you can tell us what ends up working best. For this, we worked with the layout team to figure out what we think scales best. We're going to do some more performance testing on it coming up soon to double check that answer. But this should work for most use cases. We talk about defining breakpoints. And of course, we expanded all of those things. So this is code that we wrote that's just for this. This is inside the adaptive.dart file, which you can totally steal from the repo if you wanted to. For the simplification of this example for you, we've set the desktop breakpoint to 700. So if either the height or width is 700, then it says it's desktop. This is something that we leave way up at the top of the app, and it's passed down through it reads the build context, which reads the media query. The media query, of course, is a lot like the one that you find on the web. One of the cool features of media query is that anything that's reading media query is automatically rebuilt. The widget, that part of the widget tree is automatically rebuilt. So if you change the size of your window, it will know about that. So if you were paying attention when I did mine, it was resizing itself the whole way through there. And that won't happen unless you are doing something that triggers it to do that. We have a function that we just asked, are we on desktop or not? And luckily for us, with just the 2 things, that led to a lot of places where we could put in some really simple logic, ternary operators. Obviously, if you had more form factors, you'd probably want to have a switch with all of them sitting out there. And sometimes so this is an example of changing a parameter because we're on a different form factor, but obviously whatever else around it stays the same. But then there are times where we need to return very different widget trees for some reason. Not for some reason, because we're on a different layout. So in some places, we have a completely different look and almost app for desktop than we do on mobile. So this changing parameters and having adaptive widgets that are passed in as a parameter, whether or not they're on desktop or mobile and something like that, and have internal logic that then returns different things. Those are 3 things that we think can really help you get adaptive layout pretty easily. And let us know how that works for you too. We're really, really interested in feedback from people to find out if these best practices are any help. So accessibility, again, another way to get free customers. We added support for screen readers. So a screen reader experience is when somebody who has a lot of difficulty reading turns it on and it reads it back to them. iPhones have this, Android has this, web stuff has this usually. Although one of the things that's interesting is we have research that shows that people who use screen readers will also use a magnifying glass at the same time. That people with profound disabilities often mix all the different forms of help that they can in order to get the functionality that they need. So we set semantic labels, we set semantic announcements, and for the graphs that we had, we created custom semantics. Obviously, I showed you the support for text scaling, which meant we had to deal with container sizes all over the place. Oh, and we had support for focus. That's where you can tab through like a website and it shows you which element is in focus. That's something that we now support in Flutter and is used by a lot of people as a form of accessibility. People who have motor problems. Yeah. So sometimes adding in a best practice for accessibility is super simple. Do you have a logo? Chances are that's useless information to somebody who can't see or is having trouble seeing. So you can just exclude that image from semantics. That's what we had to do here for that logo. But sometimes you have an image that has a lot of information. All you have to do on an image like that is set its semantic label to be a description of what's inside that image. For dealing with the text scale factor, you can also get that from the media query. And that's there's also a widget, I forget what it is, that I believe you can wrap your entire app in so that you can test different ones. For the graphs, there are many different ways to have graphs work with screen readers. We had ours go like every 5 notches and it read out information that way by creating custom painter semantics with semantics properties. Internationalization. So we translated into dozens of locales, 59, I believe, utilizing all the support that we have for localization. I know it's not fair. We have an internal translation team that can provide us with things, but you know, and the RTL support. Oh, here's what's really cool. If you're using a screen reader, but you're using a language that's not English, ours will read it back to you in the correct language. So we actually internationalize the screen reader experience, which is something a lot of people forget about, which is that you may be in a country that's not the same one that you're in and still need to use that. Yeah. So here's an example of often a problem that people have. They're using left and right instead of start and end, which is a lot like leading or trailing if you come from iOS. You can set tooltips on a lot of things. Tooltips are great already for when you're on the desktop. So you hover your mouse over something and a little bubble pops up that shows the description of it. Those turn into free accessibility nodes in the semantic tree. So if you set a tooltip, you'll get 2 features. You'll get the tooltip and people using a screen reader will get the experience read back to them, which in some cases is just an easy way to move forward. So I went over a lot tonight in this wonderful mishmash of things that was supposed to be at Mobile World Congress. So I went through Flutter Interact, I talked about Google Fonts for Flutter, and then some stuff for the new gallery, some of the best practices for a few things that we wanted to share, and then hopefully get feedback from you all about. So my email address is there. I really hope that if you have any things that you like or don't like about what's going on in Flutter, it's just my last name at google.com. That's an easy one, that you let us know. And the material guidelines are at material.io, and flutter.github.io/samples is the web version of the gallery that I showed you. You can also get it on the Play Store. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Okay, I would like to know, well, thanks for your presentation. It was fantastic.
Thank you.
And, I'd like to know what are the plans for Flutter regarding integration with the native environment. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with the web components concept.
Web components is something that is actually under Material also, but I don't work with that team. That's the Polymer team.
Just to make an example, I'm going to understand if.
But Flutter support for web components?
No, if Flutter may be used as we use web components on the web to build something that may be used across multiple existing projects. I mean, build a component in Dart with Flutter and then use it inside the native project for Android or iOS. Oh, so say that again? Something that comes from the web and then goes to the others, but is written? No, I mean, I have two existing projects, one iOS, one Android.
Great.
I would like to have a Flutter component for mobile, only for mobile, but to build that component in Flutter and use it in these two projects. So the add to app experience? Add to app experience, but just for components. Something.
Oh, I see. So like being able to use just a button if you wanted to, right? Something that small, or just the date picker. We actually ran an experiment on that recently, and there's some things that we need to work on performance-wise, like the number of instances of the engine and the warm-up and stuff like that, that make it not quite feasible yet. You are welcome to try it. There's not much you have to do in order to try that on your own, because a lot of the pieces are still there. You would just be returning for your add to app experience whatever component's important to you. But I would say that that's something that we're not focusing on, and we don't necessarily recommend. But try it out and let me know.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Yes, sir.
Mostly web developers are used to working to enable a cross-platform experience for.
Should you choose that or Flutter? You know what I'm going to tell you.
You're probably question
A little bit.
Do you know of any specific circumstance which one would be much better than the other?
So the question is there a specific circumstance in which PWAs would be better than Flutter to have for? I'm not familiar enough with progressive web apps to say so, but I do know that there are some times that we say that it's better to do fully native development instead of Flutter, like when you're dealing with things that are totally hardware, or when you need to use a lot of like shared C++ libraries or all sorts of features that you would have to hook up yourselves. That's what we recommend for when Flutter's not going to work for you. So maybe there are features that are particular to progressive web apps that I don't know about that would make it that you couldn't accomplish the same thing in Flutter. I don't know. I'll take that back to them though. Go ahead. It's free.
Thank you. Would like to know what are the next platforms you are targeting with Flutter? Because you showed in the video like smartwatches, systems. Would like to know, not asking for estimates, just to know what will be the next platform Flutter will be able to export.
Well, this year we're making a big focus on quality and not necessarily adding a lot of new things. Flutter has grown a lot, and so has our backlog of GitHub issues. And so we're working really hard right now on bringing that down. So anything that I gave you that would be an estimate or whatever people are talking about now could be totally wrong by the end of the year, and they may have changed their mind, because we do our planning year by year. I do know that as far, if I had to rank them in importance, it would be mobile, web, Mac OS, Windows, Linux, everything else. So that's kind of how it is right now. And we have done proofs of concept to show Android Wear is possible quite easily. I don't know about distribution because I've never distributed an app on Android Wear, but we got an app working on it without having to do anything special. I guess the Android Wear software is just that good for figuring stuff out. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure, sure. Yes.
Sometimes you may need to have to publish an app that look like a material app on Android and like a Cupertino app on iOS. So sometimes I try to find a solution to make the app look different on different devices.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very difficult because Cupertino bottom maybe they have different parameters, so Cupertino object they have different parameters than material. Is maybe are you thinking of making some kind of adjustment to the code so you write just a widget and it shape accordingly to what the platform is?
Yes, that's a great question. So Cupertino and material stuff, all those components were created independently by independent teams. And it shows in the fact that their APIs are not apples to apples or apples to Androids. I made that joke before. So we do have a problem where we have these .adaptive constructors for a couple things. We have them in the slider and the switch, which will automatically swap them out for you. I don't know if you know about those. And we're adding that to a few more. We're adding them to dialogues, app bar, I think, and some icons. But when we've looked at all the rest of it, it's not possible with the limitations of the differences in the APIs right now. One of the ones that we wish we could do easily would be how on Android and web, you have drop-down menus. You click on something, it opens a menu. But on iOS, that's not done. It's an action sheet from the bottom or a bottom sheet that comes up with stuff. When we do that, we have to do the logic ourselves. There's probably a package out there in the community by somebody who's done it, but the problem is that they're architected completely differently. So they really do not behave the same way. They do not take in the same parameters in any way that would make that easy. And as far as changing them to do that, it is something that we want to do. I don't know if it's going to happen anytime soon. It's something that I hope we could get to this year. But the best suggestions I have around that for cross-platform design adaptation is to look to the community and look to packages that are already solving that. There are a lot of Cupertino material packages that do things even beyond that. Another one of the problems when people say, I want the Android app only material and I want the iOS app only Cupertino is, like I said before, Cupertino is the iOS design language and it is a third of the size of material. It does not include every sort of component, not every element. And oftentimes when people are saying that, it's because they have this fear coming from maybe web or Android that they're going to do iOS wrong and that they know they need to change something on iOS and they're not sure what it is and they really wish there was just some magic answer that would do it for them. And we've looked into making it, but it is very difficult to define what people's expectations are around those things. But some people in the community have gone ahead and built packages that take bigger risks and go ahead and say, well, I want this button to look this way on Android and this button to look this way on iOS. And so they're both good choices that are more prescriptive than something we would make. But if you're not working with the designer and you need to go ahead and get that changed, then it could really work for you. I don't have the name of one off the top of my head, but they'll do it for all sorts of components if you look around out there. So as far as the automatic stuff from us, we are doubling the size of it, but right now we only have 2, so that's not much. And for other than that, I would look to the community. And when you do have requirements or when you're working on something like that, please write to us and let us know. Again, send me an email. If you're saying, this really frustrates me, I want this component to look this way on Android and this way on iOS, and I think that is very simple. It's not something that's very difficult or weird and is difficult to do on Flutter. Then maybe those are more opportunities that we haven't found yet that we want to know. That what you need to know? Okay, good. Yes?
Question. Have you any intention to build for SQLite like 2 minutes?
So are you asking if we have any plans to add a SQLite package? It's so funny that you should ask that. No, but somebody that it may already exist or something. There's a talk, the talk that was given before mine at Flutter London on Monday was a person who had written their app first with React Native and SQLite, and I cannot remember if he still used SQLite when he ported it over to Flutter or not. So keep an, if you want, you can email me and I can ask him for you and let you know if that already exists. But so I don't know if I'm telling you yes or no. I don't know anything about it, but he might. Sure. All right. Well, I believe that I'm going to be here for a while, right? Is that what happens next?
The networking time.
Yeah, networking time. What? So, all right. If that's so much for having me, GDG Milano, I appreciate it.